Jacob is wrestling with God on the night before he was to meet with his brother Esau, whom Jacob expected to have to fight. According to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his book, Not in God's Name, God was teaching Jacob that he didn't need to keep the blessing that he had stolen from Esau some 20 years before. Isaac, Jacob's father, gave Jacob a blessing which he could live into, a blessing which would continue God's blessing to Jacob's grandfather Abraham, that he would be a father of many people and have a land that his people could live in. This understanding came to Jacob because he lived into an honest struggle with God. Jacob began to understand that he didn't need to be another Esau, he needed to be himself. Because he struggled with God, he was given the name Israel, which means the people who struggle with God. Am I going to be any different after this pandemic is over, or will I come out on the other side unchanged? Assuming I don't get infected, of course. And what about the pandemic of racism that we have lived with for 400 years? How should I respond to this? The country is being changed. I'm wrestling with these issues now. These issues like how I meet people on the street, in church, at our places of work and entertainment. How will I be changed? How I treat people that are different from me is called into question. How do I respond? Rabbi Sachs says, thinking of Jacob, peace comes when we see our reflection in the face of God and let go of the desire to be someone else. What does my real face look like? How can I see what God sees in me? Does God see me living out certain values, or does he see me shrinking away from them? Am I living a life in someone else's clothes? I don't know, so I wrestle. The gospel today shows an example of a value that Jesus lived, the value of compassion. In today's story, Jesus had just received the news that his cousin John the Baptist had just been executed by Herod. He needed space away from the crowds so he could reflect on the news. He tried to remove himself and his disciples to a place that they could be by themselves, but the people followed. Instead of whipping the people up into a frenzied mob to retaliate on Herod, he healed them and fed them. He had compassion on them. Here's the question for me, for us. How do I respond when I'm confronted with violence and oppression? By compassion or by offsetting force? Ultimately, Jesus gave up his life because of his compassion, his love for others. Am I willing to do this? Am I living a life in someone else's clothes? I don't know, so I wrestle. I said that Jesus fed the crowd. That's not quite correct. Jesus said to his disciples, "You feed them." Jesus is calling us for a response. And here's the rub. He's asking us to help others. He's asking us to not turn our backs on those that are hungry not just for food, but for inclusion in our lives, real inclusion in our schools, in our workplaces, in our medical systems, in our justice systems. Psalm 17 today seems to be a prayer from a person who is being persecuted by others. Could this person be Jacob? This person is innocent and wants protection from God. They want God's justice. They want to see the face of God vindicating them. They say their footsteps follow the ways of God's laws. I also have a prayer. I pray that I can see my true face reflected in God's face. I pray that I have the courage to have compassion to those who need it. I pray that my compassion for others will increase as we move through this illness. I pray that my eyes are opened in compassion to see people that are different than I, not to change them to become like me, but to value their differences.